Right now, major stocks are taking a tumble. Markets in the U.S., Europe, and Asia all took a major plunge this morning. Right now, the Dow has fallen about 993 points already this morning after it already fell nearly 700 points on Friday. Now, this comes after the release of a weak jobs report, leading to fears that the U.S. could soon be headed for a recession. So joining us now is financial expert Garrett Boorojian, former managing partner and chief development officer at Wave Capital. Good morning to you, and thank you for joining us, Garrett. So first up, how concerned should the average investor or just the average person watching this morning, how concerned should they be?
Average investors and consumers should be concerned. It doesn't take an expert to know that we've seen some economic cooling. The Biden administration, they've created nearly 16 million jobs. So they've had an impressive economic record, and they should tout for their success and their leadership. So this is just a snapshot of what we're seeing. Second quarter GDP is still showing an annual rate of 2.8%, which is great news. But the Dow at its height of its sinking has been 1,238 points. So that is very concerning. Manufacturing construction jobs are down. The unemployment rate has ticked up to 4.3%. In the month of July, we saw 114,000 jobs have been created, which missed the mark of 175,000 jobs that were anticipated. So we do have to be mindful of the fact that there are still people out there hurting, getting a car, getting appliances, buying a house. I mean, interest rates are high. So the Federal Reserve Chairman, Jerome Powell, maybe should think about an emergency interest rate cut and not have to wait till mid-September.
I spoke with someone with our content partners with Working Nation on Friday when it came to that jobs report. And she said, when it comes to concern level about the numbers that we saw last week, that it is, like you said, a snapshot and shouldn't be, there's a lot of other factors that need to be brought into the conversation. And there are certain industries that are doing better than others. There are certain industries that aren't doing so great. And we know that this jobs report and this employment is partly to blame for this. But what I guess a lot of people don't realize is just how much the U.S. drives other markets around the globe. So what can we read into this when it comes to just the volatility of the economy right now on a global scale?
That's a great question, Alex. And, they always say, and when I say they always say, people in America know that when it comes to our economy, what happens with our economy is reflected throughout the world. And we have to look back to a couple of years. I think that, household spending has diminished. I think that we have seen credit card debt go back up. Inflation is still coming down, but not as much as we would like. But it is very hopeful. It's the best we've seen in the last 3 years of inflation coming down during this administration. But going into this election cycle, especially with the candidates vying for the presidency, the messaging has to be, how do we sustain a strong economy? We've seen great numbers the past 3 years overall, but we need to still be mindful of the American consumers at home. And when we see the volatility in the Middle East, when we see different wars happening really globally, that also caused a lot of stress at home economically. And consumer confidence, as we've seen, is not as strong this past couple of months. But really, if you look behind the curtain, it's probably been the past couple of years. And you can point to the fact, and that's why it's very important with Jerome Powell's message, why did we take so long as a nation? Why did we take so long to cut that benchmark interest rate? And we're seeing it in Congress, calls for that to occur.
Mm-hmm. And that's such a good point, because that has kind of been the disconnect that we've seen, right, with consumers is that what's happening on the macro level doesn't necessarily match what's happening on the micro level. And what we see at our kitchen tables on the receipts that we pull out of our grocery bags, and we're like, wait a minute, how the heck did this happen? But speaking of that meeting that you said that you believe the Fed should have that they may have been too cautious when it comes to cutting interest rates. Do you think that they've been too cautious? Is it easier to look back now, because hindsight is always 20/20? And what do you think should happen?
I was going to say the same thing, and you said it better than I could, Alex. Hindsight is 20/20. I think that before last week, because the Dow and the S&P 500, the NASDAQ have all been down for the past 3 days. I mean, under this administration, we hit the stock market, hit 40,000 points, first time in U.S. history. But again, hindsight is 2020 because at the macro level, things can be looking extraordinary. But then if you look at the micro level, so to speak, and look at individual households and individual spending, we still see grocery prices, $200-300 per grocery shop. Gasoline has come down, it's fluctuated, but we really have to really talk to the American people and say, what are you feeling at home? What is the greatest concerns in your household? And congressional response has to be based on what constituents are feeling. So the president and his cabinet and his economic team can really address the situations and talk to the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell and his team and see what can be done. Communication is everything, and it really happens in all three branches of government. It happens in everyday life in America. And so when the economy is strong based upon the consumer confidence. And if consumer confidence is there and people feel like they're getting great paying jobs that can afford bills at home, putting their kids through college, putting gasoline in their cars, buying appliances, paying down their credit cards, it really takes a village, so to speak, to really have a global response.
Mm-hmm. And really quick before we let you go, one of our Main and Wall show anchors, Chris Stewart, was on earlier and said that the next time the Fed would meet would be in September. So if they do wait until then, they don't have this emergency meeting that you're talking about. Would that be too little, too late when it comes to cutting interest rates?
Well, the emergency meeting is not set in stone.
Right.
I think that, one of your producers was talking to me right before I came on air, and he was talking about, can you speak about the emergency meeting? And I said, sure, I can. I can say with confidence that if an emergency meeting does happen, Jerome Powell, the Fed chair, has the ability to call an emergency meeting and cut interest rates so we don't have to wait till mid-September. But maybe we need to see more data come out. We need to see another string of days for us to have a down economy before we start acting. I think that we can still be cautious. We can still be mindful. I mean, cool heads prevail, as they say. And I think that if we do wait till mid-September, it's not necessarily be a good thing. We're really in limbo right now, but I think that we really need to trust the experts like Federal Chair Jerome Powell, and then myself as a financial analyst, I can say with confidence that if we're going to have an emergency meeting, and it needs to happen sooner rather than later, because if we see more data come out over the next several days, that's when we should be more concerned and act quickly. But as of right now, I can also say that just after a few days, it could be like a blip in the radar. It could be just a minor speed bump, but we just have to follow the data, follow the facts, so to speak.
All right, Garrett Boorojian, thank you so much for your insight and your time this morning. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Alex. Have a great day.
You too.